you seen those letters before? W, W, J, D? Have you seen that before? What do those letters W, W, J, D stand for? They stand for, what would Jesus do? In any situation in which you find yourself, ask yourself, if Jesus were in this situation, WWJD, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? Maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the question should be WWYD. What would you do? What would you do? This week we had John Quinones here in Austin. We heard of John Quinones before. He's on ABC News, and his segment is called what? What would you do? He has an episode called, he has a series called What Would You Do, where they have hidden cameras in different places just to see what the people do. And his question always is, if you were in this situation, WWYD, what would you do? So in one episode, we have all of the hidden cameras in the sidewalks of a city. And we have a stunt woman, an actress, dressed up as a very well-dressed woman. And the stunt woman, the actress, no one knows it's an actress or a stunt woman. But as she's walking down this crowded street, she pretends to faint. And she lies there. How long do you think it takes for someone to call 911? 4 seconds. 4 seconds, and someone is on the phone calling 911 for this woman who has fallen. Whew, that's good. They try the experiment again and again. And every time they catch it on video, and every time, within an average of 6 seconds, someone is picking up the phone and calling 911. 6 seconds. Are you ready for this now? Now we bring in an actor who's dressed like a homeless person. Dressed like a homeless person, smells like a homeless person, looks like a homeless person, and when this person falls, how long does it take for people to respond? Do they do it in 4 seconds? How interesting. WWYD, what would you do in that situation? Because a lot of the people, they just keep on walking. It took an average of 3 minutes, not 6 seconds. 3 minutes before someone would do something. And my favorite scene in that episode is when a woman, obviously a very religious woman, a holy woman, sees the man on the ground and makes the sign of the cross and keeps walking. Makes the sign of the cross and keeps on walking. 3 minutes before someone does something. So they tried another experiment. Let's have the actor dressed as the homeless man do it again, but this time let's put a beer can in his hand. What do you think? Are they going to respond more quickly? 2 days. So now the actor who's dressed like the homeless man pretends to faint or to pass out, but now he has a beer can in his hand. The hidden cameras are watching the people as they go by. What would you do? 88 people walked by that man before the first person stopped. That woman's name was Linda Hamilton. And the story of Linda Hamilton is because but she knows what it's like to be out there. She was homeless too. So when Linda Hamilton stopped and saw this man passed out with a beer can, she didn't have a cell phone herself, being homeless, but she started to ask people, "Excuse me, sir, would you please call an ambulance? Excuse me, ma'am, would you please call 911? The cruelty of people. 26 more people passed. Linda Hamilton was a person off the street who was just trying to take care of this man. In fact, she said, "I don't know your name, but I'm going to call you Billy." She respected him so much that she even gave him a name. The light bulb went on. What did she do? She took the beer can out of his hand and threw it away. And then tried again, "Would you please call an ambulance?" And finally, after 114 people walked by that man, finally, he got help. WWYD. What would you do? On another episode, one woman said, "The reason I stopped and did what I did in this situation is because I saw this show. What would you do?" And I thought, if there were hidden cameras looking at me, in today's readings, it talks about how it is that God looks at us. Because in today's first reading, it says, God doesn't have favorites, but I tell you what, Sirach says, God does look at the poor. And God does see the oppressed, and the widow, and the orphan. And God has a special place in God's heart for those people. For those people that we just make the sign of the cross at and walk on by. God has a special place in God's heart. Today's responsorial psalm says what? The Lord hears what? The cry of who?
Poor.
The poor. The Lord hears the cry of the poor. The author of today's second reading has had a similar experience. He said, everyone had abandoned me. Everyone had deserted me. Did you hear that in today's second reading? I was like that man lying on the street. No one stepped in to help me. But the good news is, God will step in and help those of us who need God's help. Do you believe that? God will step in and help those who need God's help. Today's gospel is the story of two people. The Pharisee, the holy, the religious leader, and the tax collector. And I love this story because they don't see one another as brothers. The Pharisee doesn't look at him and say, "Oh, how are you today? Good to see you here." What does he do? He looks down his nose at that person and says, "Oh, thank you, God. I'm so thankful, God, that you didn't make me like that person." Right? He looks down his nose at that person. Are you ready for an exercise? Ready for an exercise? Look at your nose. It's that simple. Look at your nose. Now, when you're looking at your nose, in what direction are you looking? You're looking down. So when you look over your nose at a person, which direction are you looking? You're looking down at that person. Have you heard that expression, looking down over your nose? He looks down his nose at people. She looks down her nose at people. It means what? It means you look down on people. You try to put yourself higher than them, more superior, and you're looking down on that person. That person with the beer can in his hand, over 114 people walked by. They didn't see him as a brother. "Oh, let me help you." They looked down on that person. Think about it for a moment. Who do you look down on? Do you look down on certain people, maybe because of their age or maturity or lack thereof? Do you look down on people maybe because of their sex or sexuality? Oh, I respect all women. Do you look down on people because of their religion? Right? Islamic fundamentalism, that's a charged word these days. Do you look down on people because of their ethnicity or their race? Think of all the jokes and slurs that we hurl at people who are not like us. In another episode of What Would You Do, there's a man who's trying to steal a bike in the middle of a park. In the middle of a park. Interestingly, this man is white. He's stealing a bike in the middle of the park, in the middle of the day. Over 100 people pass him during the course of an hour. He's there cutting out, trying to cut the chain, using a hammer, doing all these things. He's obviously doing something to get this bike. Different people will ask him, does that bike belong to you? Well, not technically, no. Obviously, something is not right about this situation. But 100 people walk by this man. On What Would You Do? They switch the scenario again. With the hidden cameras now on that same bike, who do they put stealing the bike? A black man. Do 100 people walk by during that hour? Oh man, brothers and sisters, we have to ask ourselves some serious questions, right? The first person comes and starts to ask questions and to yell at him and to get the attention of other people. And the crowd starts to gather and they take away his tools and they start taking photos to have evidence. Are we treating people the same? Or are we treating different people differently? Are we looking down on certain people? What do you call a person who looks down on others? We call them a snob, right? Do you know where the word snob comes from? Where does the word snob come from? Because back in England, we used to write S.nob behind certain people's names. When we had students come to our schools who were not part of the aristocratic society, right? We would write behind their name S.nob, meaning sine nobilitate, without nobility. Did you know that? The word snob comes from how it is that we used to distinguish people. How it is that if they were not born of royal blood or of a good family, we'd write S.nob behind their name. Sine nobilitate as a note to ourselves, they're not like us. And isn't that what snobs do? Snobs divide us. Snobs divide us. They're not like us. It's us and it's them, those sine nobilitate. Right? Snobs do that. They divide us. Bill Dalton once said, we're not racists. No one is a racist. We're not racist. We are snobs. We divide ourselves in ways where we start looking down on people for whatever reason, because of their age, or because of their race or ethnicity, or because of their religion, or because of their sex or sexuality, whatever, we start dividing ourselves and calling it us versus them. Brothers and sisters, in what ways are you a snob too? In what ways am I? In what ways are all of us snobs, looking down on certain people rather than seeing them as our brothers and sisters? This month we celebrate St. Francis of Assisi. Have we heard of St. Francis of Assisi? St. Francis was a snob. As a young man, he was a snob. He was a wealthy snob. And from his horse, he would look down at the poor and at the lepers and laugh. Until the light bulb went off and he had a conversion experience and got off his horse and started seeing the leper as his sister and brother. St. Francis was a snob, but then he woke up. Jesus. Was Jesus a snob? Did Jesus look down on other people? During his Last Supper, what did Jesus do? He got down and washed the feet of his disciples. He wasn't looking down on them, he was looking up. Are you more like the snobs of this world, looking down on people, dividing the world? Or are you more like St. Francis? And are you more like Jesus, looking up to them, down on them? Brothers and sisters, today's gospel, the story of the Pharisee, of the one who looked down his nose at other people, should make us all stop and think. Do we look at all of our brothers and sisters throughout this world in the same way and with the same love? Or are there some people we look at differently and love a little less? Some people where it's us versus them instead of welcoming them as a brother or sister. Brothers and sisters, this week's readings are heavy. As we go into this week, let's reflect on how it is that we've been snobs, looking down on certain others rather than welcoming them as brothers and sisters.